And wait, I'll just unmute myself. Lovely. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our June program, a strategy for dealing with a nuclear North Korea. My name is Ruse Dadaboy, and I'm the chair of the board of directors of the Richmond World Affairs Council. I would like to welcome all our guests, students, and World Affairs Council members. We are so delighted that you will be and you are able to join us tonight. Now, before I introduce our wonderful speaker to you, I would like to address a few housekeeping matters. As always, our program will start with the presentation. To ensure audio quality, all participants are going to be placed on mute. And this will be throughout the webinar. Now, after the presentation is over, of course, there will be a Q&A session. And while we cannot see each other's faces, please know that we welcome your engagement during the Q&A as much as possible. And for that purpose, we recommend that you use the Q&A box at the bottom bar of the screen, at the bottom right-hand corner, and type your question there. This can be done while our speaker is presenting. Alternatively, you may use the raise hand option to indicate that you would like to pose your question directly. Now, after the presentation, we will either unmute you if you raised your hand, or we will read your question on your behalf from the Q&A box. This is a good time for me to thank Data Concepts, one of Richmond's premier IT consulting firms, for their generous support, without which this webinar wouldn't be possible. Now, today, we are thrilled to welcome Ambassador Joseph DeTrani. Ambassador DeTrani was the U.S. Special Envoy for the six-party talks with North Korea and the United States representative to the North Korea Energy Development Organization. He was an associate director of national intelligence and mission manager for North Korea and the director of the National Counter-Proliferation Center, while also serving as a special advisor to the Director of National Intelligence. After government service, he was the president of the Intelligence and National Security Alliance. It is a professional think tank, and he was also president of the Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security. Ambassador DeTrani served over 2 decades with the CIA as a member of the Senior Executive Service with overseas assignments in East Asia and China, and domestically as executive assistant to the director of the Central Intelligence Director of Technical Services, European Operations, Public Affairs, and many more. Ambassador DeTrani was an officer in the Air Force, graduated with honors from NYU. He attended New York University and received a Graduate School of Business Administration degree. He also received a law degree from NYU. He speaks Mandarin. He speaks Chinese. He speaks French. He has published and spoken publicly on issues dealing with North Korea, China, cybersecurity, nuclear proliferation, nuclear non-proliferation, and international organized crime. We are so honored to have Ambassador Joseph DeTrani with us tonight. And now, without further ado, Ambassador, I turn it over to you. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you so much. That was a very gracious, generous introduction. I'm honored to be here and thank you for the invitation. I think the World Affairs Council does such excellent work. Your members are interested in what's going on in the world, and that's what all Americans should be doing, interested in what's happening in the world. And tonight we'll be talking about North Korea. And a subject that's very dear to me. I've been working this issue since 2003 when I was the special envoy. But subsequent to that, I've continued to work issues related to North Korea. And many of those were in contact with North Korean senior officials, usually at the vice foreign minister level. And that was the at track 1.5 talks. And the last one was in the late 2016 period, just before 2017, when we had significant problems with North Korea. Let me start this discussion, and I want this to be a discussion because I think it's important that I want to hear what you have. I'd like to address some of your questions. I'll ask you some questions in return. But why are we here? Why are we talking about North Korea? We've been doing this for 27 years. We've been doing this certainly since 1994 with the agreed framework. But certainly this goes way back to 1950, June of 1950, with the beginning of the Korean War. And we're talking about 71 years of history here. Over 37,000 Americans were killed during the Korean War. Over 7,000 South Koreans who were assigned to U.S. military units were killed during the war. Hundreds of thousands of South Korean nationals and millions of Koreans on the peninsula were killed during that period. That's the beginning of a 71-year process that continues. But only we're in a different phase right now. We've gone through so many phases with North Korea. A phase of North Korea, not only with the Korean War, but with an armistice in July of 1953. Mutual defense treaty with the Republic of Korea, South Korea, which we memorialized and rememorialized a few weeks ago with the visit of President Moon Jae-in with President Joe Biden. So there's a lot of history here, and what we've seen in this history is what? We've seen a period from North Korea of a nation state acting as a terrorist organization. We've seen using special forces to going after the Blue House in 1966. We've seen commandos coming into Rangoon in 1983 and attempting to take out the visiting delegation from South Korea. We've seen the taking down of the Korean Airlines in 1988 with the Seoul Olympics, Winter Olympics, with 115 people killed. We've seen in 2010 the Chung'an with 47 South Korean sailors killed with the sinking of the Chung'an frigate. So we've seen these periods, but what we're focusing on now, and we've moved on now, what we're focusing on now is something that's inimical not only to the United States' national security, but indeed to our allies and partners in the region. And that's Northeast Asia and the whole East Asian region itself. So why are we talking about North Korea at this moment now? Well, because over the years, we've yet to resolve these issues with North Korea. We're still at war with North Korea. We don't have a peace treaty. We've had negotiations, but the negotiations eventually failed. The agreed framework, 1994, was a seminal event. And a lot of the credit goes to former President Jimmy Carter with Billy Graham, who met with Kim Il-sung at that time to get it going. And then Ambassador Robert Colucci moving forward with getting an agreement. And that fell apart in 2002 because North Korea was pursuing a highly enriched uranium program, another path to nuclear weapons. The six-party talks that I was involved with, we had a joint statement in September 2005 after 2 years of negotiations. But that came to naught in the latter part of 2008 when North Korea said IAEA monitors could not leave the Yongbyon facility and visit non-declared suspect nuclear facilities. So during this period of time, we've had negotiations with North Korea, 27 years worth, but eventually they all failed. And what we have now is a North Korea with significant nuclear weapons. We're talking about 20 to 60 nuclear weapons. We're talking about nuclear weapons that have been miniaturized, that can be mated to nuclear, that can be mated to missile delivery systems, intercontinental ballistic missiles, intermediate range ballistic missiles, short range ballistic missiles. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's just think about this. North Korea has nuclear weapons, and they have two paths to nuclear weapons. One is plutonium, which is the beginning when we started with the agreed framework. And that's reprocessing spent fuel rods for the plutonium for nuclear weapons, the fissile material. The other is highly enriched uranium, enriching uranium at a high level, 90% plus enrichment of uranium for nuclear weapons. Two paths. They have between 20 and 60 nuclear, and they've miniaturized, and they can mate them to intercontinental ballistic missiles. We saw this in 2017 when they launched a Hwasong 14, a Hwasong 15. These missiles have a reach of the whole of the continental United States. They've had for years intermediate range missiles, short range missiles that indeed were and are an existential threat to our allies in South Korea, Japan. And now with the intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach the whole of the United States, an existential threat to the United States. So when we're looking at the nuclear program, we're looking at the missile delivery program, intercontinental ballistic missiles, intermediate range ballistic missiles, short range ballistic missiles, significant. But we're also looking at chemical weapons, biological weapons. We're looking at North Korea using cyber. We saw what they did with Sony Pictures in 2014 when they went in and basically shut down Sony Pictures for a period of time. What they've done with the banks in Bangladesh, what they've done with the banks in South Korea, ATM machines. They're doing it with cryptocurrency. We're talking about billions of dollars. So we're talking about a North Korea with a significant arsenal. And what we're saying and what we're pursuing is finding a resolution to these issues with North Korea. And one would have to ask the question, and it's asked often, why? Why are we talking to them? It's obvious they wanted nuclear weapons and they have nuclear weapons and they're never going to get rid of the nuclear weapons. So why are we talking to them? Well, we're talking to North Korea for the past 27 years because there are many who believe, and I'm one of them, who believe that North Korea, and I've been told this by the North Koreans so many times, and I do believe them when they tell us, that they want a normal relationship with the United States. They do not want to be a pariah state, heavily sanctioned. They do not want to be, if you will, treated as indeed a pariah state. They want normal relations with the United States, which would give them international legitimacy, foreign direct investment, the ability, and we saw this with Kim Jong-un in Singapore during the Singapore summit with former President Donald Trump, where he was very, very much in his element in Singapore. In fact, videos of his visit to Singapore were disseminated in North Korea. This is unheard of because it's making it clear to the North Koreans that there are other countries like Singapore and they live so differently because there's significant poverty in North Korea. There's significant malnourishment. Over 40% of the population is malnourished. So when North Korea says, we want a normal relationship with the United States, and in that context, they just do not want to be tethered to one country, and that's China, because over 90% of their trade, 90% of the crude oil, the petroleum products come from China, that they want to diversify, they want to open up. And the US is that path to international legitimacy. But they have a condition for that. They want to be accepted as a nuclear weapons state. Now let's think about this. This is very important. they've been saying this since 2003, since I've been meeting them, and I've been meeting them since 2003 into the latter part of 2016, direct contact with the very senior officials, that they want a normal relationship, but they want to be treated as a nuclear weapon state. And they cite Pakistan. They said, you've done it with Pakistan, you can do it with us. So North Korea has a desire. And my assessment is that they feel they eventually will succeed in convincing the United States and its allies and partners that we can have a normal relationship with North Korea and accept them as a nuclear weapon state. And as they have told me many times and others, they would behave properly. They would never use it. The nuclear weapons are for deterrence purposes only. They would never use it against any other country. And that's probably true. And because North Korea is not suicidal, using it would be the end. But the fact of the matter is North Korea with nuclear weapons would lend itself, many believe, and I'm one of them, to a nuclear arms race in the region, whether it's South Korea, whether it's Japan and others. The possibility of proliferation, the possibility of a nuclear weapon or fissile material for a dirty bomb going into the hands of a rogue state or a non-state terrorist actor. These are all possibilities. So what we've told North Korea, and what we continue to tell North Korea, is you can have a normal relationship with the United States, but not as a nuclear weapon state. And that's what the negotiations have been about. This is what President Donald Trump pursued in Singapore and then in Hanoi. And we had some progress in Singapore, but Hanoi didn't go anywhere, unfortunately. We could talk about that as we get into the Q&As. But now with President Joe Biden and his recent meeting on the 21st of May with President Moon Jae-in, he's re-energized this process. He wants to engage with North Korea. He wants to talk about complete denuclearization, complete verifiable denuclearization, and a path to normal relations. But again, when you get on a path to normal relations with the United States, and the North Koreans know this, and this has always been told to them very clearly, they need to address their human rights issues. They need to be transparent on those issues. They need to show progress on the human rights issues. Because to normalize with the United States is not only denuclearization, it's getting their act together on human rights, transparency, and progress in disbanding those gulags in North Korea. They have to make progress on illicit activities, cease and desist with your counterfeiting of cigarettes and pharmaceuticals and methamphetamine, and using cyber and crypto to go after nation states and private entities. You need to do that. But with that, we can move towards a normal relationship. And in that process, we would give North Korea the security assurances that they say they need, and indeed they do need. North Korea is a small country living with very big countries all around them. And historically, over 2,000 years of recorded history tells them very carefully that they have to be very careful, whether it's China, whether it's Japan, whether it's Russia. They have to be very self-reliant. And of course, it's one of the reasons why they have nuclear weapons. We convince them that with a normal relationship with the United States, security assurances, economic development assistance, the lifting of sanctions, and indeed, with the progress on other things, which could even lend itself to a discussion of the provision of light water reactors for civilian nuclear energy. So let me make these 2 points on the recent meeting between President Joe Biden and President Moon Jae-in. Not only did we reaffirm our mutual defense treaty and expand it to different domains like space and cyber. Not only did we say the missile guidelines for South Korea are no longer in play, and South Korea now has the opportunity of not only developing but operating missiles that are not restricted to anything that does not exceed 800 kilometers. That's major missile sovereignty for South Korea, very major. We talked about COVID-19 and the vaccine, sharing that. We have over 550,000 South Korean troops. We talked about working on semiconductors and integrating in so many different ways. But we also talked about inter-Korean relations, where South Korea now will pursue inter-Korean relations with North Korea on humanitarian and economic issues. Humanitarian issues, whether it's the vaccine for COVID-19, whether it's providing food aid, whether it's pharmaceuticals, humanitarian issues. But it's also bringing separated families together. It's also economic issues like the visits of South Koreans to Mount Kumgang, maybe reconstituting the Kaesong industrial complex, inter-Korean relations, economic and humanitarian. And the other piece to that is complete verifiable denuclearization, where the United States and South Korea are set on complete verifiable denuclearization. And what was cited there was the Panmunjom Declaration, where in 2018, President Moon Jae-in met with Chairman Kim Jong-un, and they solidified and they memorialized a Panmunjom Declaration that spoke to reconciliation and peace on the Korean Peninsula. And that lent itself to what? The Singapore Joint Statement. We would transform our relationship with North Korea. We would also look to having a peace treaty to end the Korean War, finally, after 71 years. We would look to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the return of the remains of Americans who were lost during the Korean War, which is a big, big issue. There are so many remains of Americans who were lost in the Korean War that need to be returned to the United States and their loved ones. These were the progress. This was it. This was discussed. And if we could reconstitute this, if we can get this back in motion, that will be very, very, very significant. And also noting that the Biden administration, now they have a special envoy, Sung Kim, a man I've worked with, I have high regard for. He's our ambassador to Indonesia. He was the ambassador in South Korea. He worked on the six-party talks. He knows the Korean issue so well. But also working with South Korea, our allies in Japan, our partners, China, Russia, to resolve the issue, the nuclear issue, and all those other elements to instability in the region that the nuclear issue presents itself with. So, and one final point I'll make before we want to open it up is what the Biden administration was also talking about, being creative and being flexible. And when I hear the word flexible, what I interpret that to mean is, we're not talking about a Libya model. We're not telling North Korea, you need to dismantle all your nuclear weapons and facilities. And then once you do that, we'll talk about giving you the security assurances. We'll talk about lifting sanctions. We're talking about actions for actions, commitments for commitments, as they move towards complete verifiable denuclearization. The US and our allies and partners move towards giving them the security assurances, the economic development assistance, the lifting of sanctions, and the other deliverables North Korea has been asking for. So that's that element of flexibility. And that, I'll note, was one of the reasons why many would say, and I'm one of them, we did not succeed in Hanoi. In Hanoi, we presented Kim Jong-un, and he presented the Yongbyon. He said he'd freeze Yongbyon in return for the lifting of sanctions that were imposed post 2016. And we said, no, you just need to focus on getting rid of all your nuclear weapons and your missile delivery systems. And then we'll move on lifting of the sanctions accordingly. Surprisingly, hopefully, one would have thought at that time Kim Jong-un would have stayed at the table and pursued a negotiation, because we had the beginning of working off the Singapore Declaration of 2018, June of 2018. We had the makings of a good dialogue, as we had with the six-party talks with the joint statement of September 2005. That was the basis for a discussion, but unfortunately, Chairman Kim Jong-un was not prepared to talk about that, and that was the end of the meeting there. So subsequent to that, we've had literally no contact, dialogue with North Korea. The Biden administration has reached out, and we're hoping North Korea now responds subsequent to the President Moon Jae-in visit with President Joe Biden, that they show responsiveness and come back to the negotiating table and talk about a path to normal relations with the United States, the lifting of sanctions, the provision of other benefits, economic development benefits, but also security assurances in return for a process that lends itself to complete, verifiable denuclearization. And what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is initially freezing everything, no more nuclear weapons, no more intercontinental ballistic missile launches or intermediate range ballistic missile launches, no more nuclear tests, freezing all of that. And that's the beginning then of a roadmap where on an action for action basis, as North Korea moves towards complete verifiable denuclearization, they start getting all the security assurances and movement towards a normal relationship, to include, I might add, progress on normalization of relations with the United States, which could be a liaison office in our respective capitals or an interest section in our respective capitals as we move towards embassies. And as we remember with China, it was in it was really in the beginning of the year was very, very similar. When we had the Nixon visit in 72, in 75, we had liaison offices. And in January of 79, we normalized relations. So it was a 4-year period there during which we built that trust, we built that confidence in that relationship. And then we established normal relations with embassies in our respective capitals. That is not a bad model. So let me end on that. And let me just say, I'm impressed with all of you who are members of the World Affairs Council, certainly those who are here this evening, but who are interested in this issue, because this is an issue that touches all Americans. And it goes beyond just the United States. We talked about our allies and partners, but it touches all of us. But we're talking about a nuclear weapon state in North Korea, a state that is basically a pariah state, heavily sanctioned. And they continue to build nuclear weapons. And now they have the delivery systems to make them indeed an existential nuclear threat to the region, but eventually to the United States. And that's something we have to address, because we're talking about, as remote as it may seem now, the possibility, and we go back to the First World War, we realize how nations could stumble into accidental conflict. And we don't want that, obviously, to happen with North Korea. And that's why it's important to be at the table to talk about accomplishing our goal of complete, verifiable denuclearization. So let me end on that. And again, I commend all of you for being patient, listening to me. And why don't we have a discussion? Please.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We are happy to take questions at this point. And I see we already have one question, and I will read it to you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
So Paula Margolis would like to know whether North Korea can be trusted to keep agreements if the US helps them with development. And is China a cautionary tale that can be applied to North Korea?
You know, it's a very good question, because we saw with the agreed framework in 1994, although we had an agreement with them, they were still pursuing a clandestine uranium enrichment program. So verification is a very important part of the equation with North Korea. And that's why the 6-party talks, joint statements of September 2005 failed. It was on the question of verification, where we insisted that monitors would have to leave declared facilities and visit non-declared suspect facilities, nuclear facilities. So yes, it's a very good question. We have to ensure, because North Korea is determined to retain nuclear weapons. But we have to make sure that's not an option. For normal relations, that's not an option. And verification, therefore, is very important. And yes, China is very important in this equation. China was instrumental in the six-party talks, getting North Korea to the table, and then getting an agreement in September 2005. China will be very important in convincing North Korea, in my view, to come back to negotiations with the Biden administration. And it's very important to remember that China, as a member of the Security Council, has to be on board when we talk about sanctions on North Korea and imposing those sanctions and ensuring that they are being addressed properly. So China is so significant in resolving issues, certainly the nuclear issue with North Korea. And I personally think China also is committed. I've seen it over the years, and I still see it in my discussions with the Chinese officials. They are determined also to get complete verifiable denuclearization. Nuclear weapons in North Korea is not something that China wants to see happen and persist and become a reality, for fear that in any instability, a loose nuclear weapon or instability on the peninsula could lend itself to migration issues going into China. These are not issues that China would want to have to address and would want to address. So yes, I think they're on board on getting an agreement with North Korea on complete verifiable denuclearization.
Thank you. Dale would like to know, what is the likelihood President Biden will extend the current sanctions against North Korea for another year?
No, I think the likelihood is very good. I mean, North Korea has refused. We've had some overtures to the North Koreans about coming back to negotiations. And until they come back to negotiations, I can't see how the sanctions that have been imposed, mind you, by the UN Security Council. These are UN Security Council resolutions. I don't see why the US would be supportive of lifting those sanctions or making that a condition for coming back to negotiations. We would lift sanctions. I think once North Korea does come back to negotiations, that's probably going to be one of the major issues to be discussed, the lifting of sanctions. And that's understandable, the lifting of sanctions. And certainly if North Korea says we'll freeze our nuclear program, no more fissile material production, we'll have a moratorium on missile launches, you could see where that would be put into play, where someone would say, okay, let's selectively lift some of these sanctions. Let's move. And that's what negotiations are all about. And that's why it's important for our special envoy and our team here to meet with the North Korean team to talk about a roadmap. How do you move forward in an action for action, commitment for commitment basis? And you know, even though we saw some very top-down diplomacy with former President Donald Trump, and we did see some progress with the Singapore joint statement, but again, that was very nominal because the substance wasn't behind it. Obviously, what had to follow would be the negotiators, then the substantive experts sitting down with their counterparts in North Korea and talking about, okay, how do we go about this? How do we do the verification? What are the sanctions that would be lifted? How we ensure that you are committed to not producing any more fissile material? What's the process on dismantlement? And how do we make progress on a roadmap that would eventually lend itself to complete verifiable? That's the subject matter experts need to be sitting down with their counterparts in the North. And in the six-party talks, we had 5 countries sitting down with North Korea. With the Trump administration, it was the US and North Korea. The Biden administration, I think, is open to working with our allies and partners if that's necessary. But Right now, it's the US that has the lead on the nuclear issue, and South Korea has the lead on inter-Korean relations, both economic and humanitarian. So I think a very logical approach. And one would hope that North Korea is responsive. And I would hope within the next few weeks, certainly not beyond a few months, that North Korea would come to the table.
Thank you. Razak asks, it seems that China seems to be moving towards one country, two systems, to one world, two systems, which it wants many of the countries connected to its Road and Belt initiatives to become its ally against the USA and the West. Do you think China is the main force that hindering the genuine reintegration of North Korea with the rest of the world? Secondly, you mentioned geopolitical factors are key to resolve the issues of North Korea and cannot adopt Middle East strategies like the Libya model. So what will work in this context? I'm sorry, this was a long question. I can repeat if I need to.
No.
All right.
No, I think China with the Belt and Road Initiative, there's no question. That's Xi Jinping's strategy. It goes back to, it goes back a number of years, 2014, 2015. And the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, where China is using their economic prowess, economic means to affect closer relationships with countries. And in some countries, there's also the realization that China would like, we saw with Djibouti, to establish port facilities and other facilities there. So yes, this is a major soft, if you will, soft power in quotes, initiative on the part of President Xi Jinping to reach out to the world. I mean, we're talking about, we're talking about not only the region, we're talking about the Middle East, we're talking about Europe, and we're talking even about Latin America, the world, so that they would be involved with the Belt and Road Initiative. They're also talking about a cyber Belt and Road Initiative. So yes, this is a major initiative on the part of China. And Xi Jinping has talked about their type of system, an autocracy, where it's, where the leadership makes decisions, and they cite the economic development in China and how they took over 600 million people out of poverty and so forth. We in the United States, and we reconfirmed that with a meeting with President Moon Jae-in just a few weeks ago, we're talking about not only the economic aspects to it, we had the Marshall Plan after the Second World War, and we're very much involved with the World Bank and other initiatives to provide economic aid and development assistance to other countries, AID and other organizations within the US. But we're also talking about our values, which is the rule of law, which is democratization and so forth. And yes, they were near peer competitors with China. China has their own system. We have our system here. And I like the comment made about one country, two systems. Well, that was used with Hong Kong, and we can see that two systems didn't work too well with Hong Kong. Now it's one country, one system with Hong Kong, right? I mean, so you don't have that element of the of autonomy in Hong Kong that we thought was going to be there in 1997. So yes, so China is looking at that. China feels that they have the economic prowess, and they have a governance system that should be appealing to many countries. We feel in the United States that our system, our values, democratization and the rule of law and other aspects to it, the freedoms, the various freedoms of speech and publication, et cetera, will outweigh them, and we'll be able to outcompete China in that regard. But the fact of the matter is, on the issue of North Korea, I personally think, and I think we've seen that with the six-party talks, China is in sync, I think, if that's the right word, with countries that are talking about denuclearization of North Korea. Nuclear weapons in North Korea lends itself for a lot of uncertainties that could affect China. And I think with China, given all their initiatives, as was mentioned with the Belt and Road Initiative, with some of their own demographic issues within their own country, etc. I don't think China would like to see instability on the Korean Peninsula, whether it's loose nukes, whether it's migration issues, and so forth. So I think that on this issue of North Korea, indeed, this is something that China can work with the United States on. When their foreign minister, Wang Yi, talks about we need to cooperate, yes, well, let's do it on North Korea. We did it in 2003 to 2005, and we could do it again. And when we talk about Libya, the Libyan model, and the South and the North Koreans would mention that to South Korea, to the United States, to me often. As recent as my last meeting with their vice foreign minister at the end of 2016, we're not Libya. We see what happened to Gaddafi when he gave everything up, and then he was vulnerable, and then look what happened to him. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a transformation of a relationship, not only to normalize a relationship, but we're also talking about security assurances. We're talking about economic development assistance. We're talking about economic integration with the North and South so that eventually we could see a reunification on the Korean Peninsula. Those are important points, and we should not forget the element of this is a separated country since 1947. The North and South at the 38th parallel have been separated. Reunification is the goal of both the North and South, indeed in the South. And that's what we're hoping for. So I don't think the Libya model, I would never mention the Libya model in my meetings. I don't think it's appropriate to mention it. And I think when the North Koreans mention that, it's basically a warning to the United States saying, we're not oblivious to what happened to Gaddafi. We're not oblivious to what happened to Saddam Hussein. So don't treat us that way. Treat us, respect us, treat us as a sovereign nation state, negotiate with us fairly. And we're saying, yes, we're prepared to do all of that. Unfortunately, we've lost some of the trust. I think former President Donald Trump did build some of that trust on a leadership basis. But again, after Hanoi, we've lost some of that connectivity, but I think we can regain that. Because I think the North Koreans, when they say they want a normal relationship with the United States, that's powerful, ladies and gentlemen. Here's a country, after 71 years of a war. I mean, the armistice is just a halt. We're still at war. They're still saying, we want to normalize with you, the United States. We feel that a normal relationship with you would turn the page for North Korea. And indeed, they do need to turn the page for economic development assistance. I talked about malnourishment. We're talking about the NGOs from the US who go into North Korea, who work on tuberculosis and some other issues there. So, and right now, North Korea is tethered to one country, and that's China. And I think they want to diversify in a significant way. So yes, I think Libya model is off the table. I think it's a different model. It's a model of dealing with the United States and its allies and partners in a very fair way. But we will have very clear demands, not only complete verifiable denuclearization, but indeed progress on human rights and a halt to this criminal illicit activity behavior.
Thank you. We have a question about South Korea, but let me skip on to the next one first, because you had already mentioned China, and Paula would like to know, do you really think that China would allow the democratization of a country that it shares a border with? Democratization.
Okay, you mean in North Korea? Well, no, I don't think North Korea is prepared to change. I don't think they're going to change their form of governance. I think the Kim family, that's why they want security assurances. And right now, that's why they have nuclear weapons, to ensure that there's no attempt at regime change. Having these nuclear weapons gives the regime, the Kim family, the assurances that they could retain power, the survivability of the Kim family. So no, I think that governance is not, we're not talking about governance. We're talking about transformation of a bilateral relationship with progress on human rights and illicit activities. But also, and I emphasize that, progress on human rights. And we're very mindful, we always bring this up in our negotiations with North Korea. A normal relationship with the US is not just complete verifiable denuclearization. It's progress on human rights. We're not talking about changing their form of governance. We're not talking about democratization in North Korea. We're talking about basically respecting their people. We're talking about working on issues that touch human rights and illicit activities, but also with an integration with foreign direct investment and integration into the international community, where there'd be more exchanges going back and forth, a transformation of maybe some behavior patterns in North Korea. Look, as North Korea moves with South Korea, and as South Korea reaches out on inter-Korean relations, we're going to be seeing more, hopefully more interaction between the North and South. And we talk about a democracy, we're talking about South Korea. I mean, that's a model of a liberal democracy that is thriving economically and vibrant. What a model that is. And North Korea is going to have to realize that and understand and economic integration with the South. And that's why they're going to be, they've got to build that trust, build the roads, connecting the South and North, build the train lines, the North and South, connecting them, maybe a federation to begin with, moving towards reunification. It's going to be a long process, ladies and gentlemen, but I think it's going to be there. But no, I don't think the Kim family, if anything, the Kim family and some who argue against North Korea ever giving up nuclear weapons and seeking a normal relationship with the United States argue that if they should do that, it would affect the form of governance they have in North Korea now. It would affect the Kim family's ability to rule, basically. And we're saying, no, we're not talking about regime change. We're not talking about imposing any form of type of governance like democratization. But we are saying progress on human rights and illicit activities.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. So moving on to South Korea, Jonathan would like to know what role should South Korea play in the process? And you've already talked about inter-Korea relations, picking those up. Would you expand a little on that?
No, I think that's a very good question. It's a very important one because the last few years during the Trump administration, there was very little successful inter-Korean dialogue. We saw Kim Yo-jong, the sister of Kim Jong-un, come out with some pronouncements that were very critical of South Korea. Oh, they had a joint liaison office in Kaesong in the southern part of North Korea, adjacent to the south, taking down that liaison office. So we've not only did not see progress, we saw, significant backward movement on inter-Korean relations. So what the Biden administration has made clear with the meeting with the President Moon Jae-in is, yes, pursue economic inter-Korean relations, pursue it from an economic vantage point, pursue it from a humanitarian vantage point. Humanitarian, obviously, whether it's food aid, because there is issues in North Korea. They've had a drought, they had COVID-19, they closed the border with China, whether it's food aid, whether it's providing humanitarian assistance that speaks to pharmaceuticals, drugs, other issues to hospitals and so forth. Whether it's reuniting separated families from the Korean War, which has always been a very important part of inter-Korean relations. And that's been halted for about the last 3.5, 4 years. Reuniting these separated families, visits to Mount Kumgang, where South Koreans can visit Mount Kumgang and build some of that dialogue with the North. Kaesong Industrial Complex, which was in the area of Kaesung in the southern part of North Korea, where you had significant South Korean investment in joint manufacturing enterprises at the Kaesung Industrial, possibly reconstitute that, talking about connecting the North and South with the rail lines, which obviously have been disconnected for significant periods of time, decades. The roads, connecting the roads. So there's so much that could be done on inter-Korean relations, and a good question. And part of that is what was discussed with President Biden and President Moon Jae-in with the Panmunjom Declaration of 2018. And that spoke about, if you will, bringing peace and reconciliation, which translates into inter-Korean relations, building that dialogue, putting those initiatives in place and movement, because eventually this is a Korean issue. It's the Korean Peninsula, ladies and gentlemen. And it's two separated countries that have to eventually be reunited, and that's the goal. So inter-Korean relations is a very important part of it. Look, the ball is, and I hate to use these metaphors, but really the ball is in North Korea's court, because I could assure you, President Moon Jae-in during the last year of his presidency will be very aggressively reaching out to the North and trying to get these programs into play so they could build confidence and trust and show some progress to the respective people in the North and South.
Thank you. Going back to your presentation, Cheryl would like to know, she says, you have said North Korea is determined to maintain nuclear weapons independence and simultaneously suggested the US position is denuclearization with verification. How is this huge gap to be bridged, and why do you think North Korea is on the brink to accept denuclearization? And what actions by North Korea might support this view?
Well, no, it's a very good question. That's why we're here at the table after 27 years of negotiations. Look, and I'm with that. I mean, at this moment now, North Korea is not prepared to denuclearize in a complete verifiable way. I agree with all my colleagues who say that. I maintain, however, that there's hope that through dialogue, and we saw this again with the Singapore joint statement, we saw it with the Six Parties Talks joint statement in September 2005, and even the agreed framework in 1994. We saw some progress, but we've heard from Kim Jong-un himself, but also his father, Kim Jong-il, and his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, to Billy Graham and to Jimmy Carter in 1994, and Kim Jong-un to President Donald Trump and Moon Jae-in in 2018, that he's prepared to completely verifiably denuclearize, but in return for a lot of deliverables. So there is that glimmer of hope that through negotiations, if this man is serious about it, as his father was with Kim Jong-il with the joint statement of September 2005. In 2005, that joint statement was pretty comprehensive. And in 2007 and 2008, we started taking down the Yongbyon plutonium complex. We took down the cooling tower. We had monitors in there doing it, but it was on the question of verification that everything failed. So my answer to the question, it's a very good question, is if there's some hope that we could resolve this peacefully, because if we don't resolve it peacefully, what's the alternative? The alternative is either we accept North Korea as a nuclear weapon state, which is what they want, and they think eventually we will eventually give up and say, okay, we'll accept you as a nuclear weapon state, as we did with Pakistan. But that's fraught with so many unknowns and unpredictable developments with nuclear proliferation, et cetera. in the region. The other alternative, which is the more likely one, is more sanctions as they continue to launch missiles and have nuclear tests. And implementing those sanctions, ensuring that all countries implement the sanctions. Greater deterrence. It's not only working on our joint military exercises with South Korea, but it's also ensuring that we have the extended deterrence capabilities in the region, to include missile defense capabilities in the region. Because God knows, I mean, they may launch a missile and could be an intercontinental ballistic missile, and we don't know what's on the tip of it. Or we may have to take it down, and North Korea may misconstrue that as the beginning of an onslaught. So the potential of stumbling into accidental war is always there. But the alternative is sanctions, greater sanctions, implementing those sanctions, greater deterrence, missile defense, and some are even talking about, and I do not subscribe to it, but talking about the reintroduction of tactical nuclear weapons to the region. So look what that equation looks like. That element looks like when we talk about accidental warfare, accidental conflict. So if we have a glimmer of hope through negotiations, why not exploit it to its utmost and see if we can make the progress necessary, although we failed for 27 years, make the progress necessary to resolve these issues.
Thank you. Mr. Boomer has an interesting question again concerning China. With North Korea's dependence on China, he thinks China could impose any conditions it wants in North Korea. Is it possible China benefits from North Korea's threat to South Korea, Japan, US, and the West?
Well, you know, North Korea is a very important buffer zone for China, right? We saw this in the Korean War. We saw this when the Allied troops went to the river, the Yalu. Look, North Korea is an important buffer zone for China. And indeed, China has in 1961, and this year they will confirm it, peace and friendship treaty with North Korea. The only country, in addition to Russia, that North Korea has such a treaty with. So North Korea is important for China as a buffer zone. Indeed, it's important for China there. But again, North Korea with nuclear weapons is potentially inimical to China's own domestic interests and so forth. But it doesn't mean that China would not be concerned about reunification, and on what terms reunification, and where would the US military be with reunification, and so forth. That lends itself to a separate dialogue certainly with the Republic of Korea and China, but also with China and the United States. But I think the first issue now is denuclearization. I think this is where China and the US are on the same page. We both agree on that. But indeed, China is very, very comfortable with an allied relationship with the North Korea that provides a very important buffer zone with South Korea, but also obviously with the United States.
Thank you. I am looking to see if we've got any more questions. I think we may be at the end here. It doesn't look like. I think we've answered everyone's question.
I think everyone looked at the time and they said, my goodness, it's 7 o'clock. So we're not going to ask this man any more questions because he'll keep talking and talking. Right?
Oh, it's been wonderful. Oh, we have one more question and that will be the true end. Cheryl asks, is not the German unification an example that Kim Jong-un would reject?
Yeah, I mean, Germany was a little different in that equation. I mean, we saw a reunification. The Berlin Wall came down. We saw developments on that. Certainly, North Korea is very mindful of German reunification and what happened there. But North Korea is very, with the leadership there, very protective of their form of governance in the survivability of their form of governance and ensuring that they prevail. And that's why if indeed we ever get a resolution or an agreement with North Korea on complete verifiable denuclearization, that's why security assurances is so important, to provide the regime, if you will, the Kim family, assurances that we're not talking about affecting their form of governance. No, they look at the German reunification, they say that is not how it would play out in North Korea and South Korea.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, with that, I think we've reached the true end.
All right,
thank you.
good.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, everyone, for coming, for your questions this evening, for your engagement at the end. It's been really fun. And again, thank you, Ambassador, for just, taking the time to share your expertise, your perspectives on North Korea. This is a topic that we've had frequently here at the Council, and yet again, it's always great to hear from practitioners about the current status, the current perspectives. So thank you so much. We are really grateful to have had you here this evening.
Thank you for the invitation. It was
yes.
lovely. And thanks for being so interested in such an important issue. Good luck to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. And in closing, everyone, I also would like to let you know real quick that our next webinar will be with Kelsey Davenport, who will talk about Iran later in the summer. Kelsey Davenport is the Director of Non-Proliferation Policy at the Arms Control Association, and we're really looking forward to that one as well. And we hope that all of you will be able to join us again for that evening. Event invitations will go out as usual, and if you're not subscribed, information will be on the website later on and social media as well. But with that, thanks again, everybody, for coming, and we hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.